Good evening. For those who've been here both in January as well as this evening, where we've had the room set up a little differently with tables and food, we've all remarked at how different the atmosphere is. It's kind of a party atmosphere. A lot of noise and talking and laughter. There's a lesson, Pastor, in that when we sit in pews in rows, it's awful quiet, but the socialization that goes on around the table is a wonderful thing. We're glad that you're here this evening for the University Colloquium of Adventist University of Health Sciences. I'm Don Williams, Assistant to the President for Mission. And I always like to get a sense, how many are here for the first time to a University Colloquium program? Okay, quite a few. Wow. So the word is getting out. That's good. This is our third year. Each year we choose a theme. 3 years ago our theme was moral courage, and we had some fantastic speakers on that topic. Then resilience. This year it is integrity. And just in January we had the three wise guys here, and they talked about how you teach integrity within your own faith tradition and how you then relate to those that are different from yourself but maintain your own integrity. So we had a good time with them, and we're delighted that you're here this evening. Just a little bit of business and we'll get right into the program. There is a card on your table, and you'll see it there with some pens. We don't need you to fill it in right now, but it has 3 items there. Please tell us how you heard about the colloquium. We do advertise around the community. We'd like to know what's most effective so that we can be good stewards of the funds that we have. If you would like to have your name on our email list so that we can send you out announcements about upcoming colloquia, please write that down as well. And then if you have any suggestions, I asked for the salty and sweet popcorn, but nobody listened to me. Maybe next time. So, whatever it is that you would like to give us some advice on, that would be nice. So we would really invite your input for us. That would be a very, very helpful thing. Then after Dr. Hunter's presentation this evening, there are 2 things that are going to happen. After he speaks, there are mics set up on either side, and there will be a time of Q&A if you have any questions for him. And then after the program is over, we also have some of his books, the book, A New Kind of Conservative. He's written a number of books. This is one that we felt was perhaps most relevant to the topic tonight. And it's available for sale in the lobby, and he'll also be out there to sign copies, which is a nice thing to be able to have as well. So keep that in mind. Also, we have a program coming up this next Monday evening on learning, and Dr. Len Archer asked me to make this announcement, and then his phone just went off on me. So Len, if you could come up and pull it up. This gentleman that's speaking has a name that I'm not going to go from memory on. But anyway, 7 o'clock this coming Monday evening, it's on, here we go. Todd Zakrzewski. Don't tell him how I pronounced it, please. And he'll be presenting on teaching for learning, evidence-based tips and strategies. So another event sponsored by the university here. So we're delighted that you're here, and I want to tell a little bit about our speaker. I know that there are some folks here this evening who are actually members of his church. Dr. Joel Hunter is the pastor of Northland, a church distributed. Now, he told me as we've kind of gotten ready for our program this evening that that's a very important and very carefully chosen phrase that's part of the title of the Northland. We used to call it Northland Community Church, I think. It's over on Dog Track Road. But it's a church distributed, and they actually have a presence in every continent, except maybe Antarctica. Still working on Antarctica. trying to get him to come in from the cold. But they have a footprint, not that there's a Northland church, but they try to connect with local congregations and have live streaming and so forth. So there's about 20,000 members here in Central Florida, but they have a footprint around the world. And he told me that their church was really established, not so much to be a sanctuary here, but to be a broadcast center to believers all over the world. I think he said 4,000 churches in Africa alone. So that's a remarkable thing. But that isn't why we asked him to come tonight. Also, he's a recipient. If you Google him, he's even in Wikipedia, you'll see that he has received many awards and has earned a number of degrees, has some honorary degrees as well, I believe. But that's not why we invited him here tonight. He's on a number of local boards and commissions. He's on some national boards as well. And that gets a little closer as to why we invited him here tonight. You may know this about him, that he offered the closing prayer at the 2008 Democratic National Convention and offered a blessing on the pre-inaugural worship service for President Obama back in 2008. And that gets even closer. You're wondering where I'm going to go with this after the primaries last night, right? He's a little nervous, perhaps. But that's a little closer as to why we have invited him to come here. Also, he's served on the President's Advisory Council on Faith-Based Neighborhood Partnerships. We asked him to speak tonight because our theme is integrity, and we believe that he has a tremendously powerful message, both with his own life and integrity, as well as with what he's written and the example that he's given to us. An integrity that has motivated him to work with power brokers as well as the poor, to work with both evangelicals and to be concerned about the environment. And so I'd like to have you welcome with me Dr. Joel Hunter.
It was so fun to talk to Dr. Williams when he was inviting me to come and talk, and I said, why do you want me to come and talk? And basically, this is what he said. I've noticed that, our subject is integrity, and you seem to be constantly involved in a number of controversial issues, and seem to kind of still be the same guy. And that's French for, you're always in trouble. And I want to know how you keep your head when you're always in trouble. And indeed, he's right. I had a mom who taught me to love people who were different than I was. And even though I'm an evangelical pastor, I keep getting into areas that are usually dismissed by the evangelical church. They're either ignored as inconsequential, or they're viewed with suspicion, or sometimes outright slander. We host and work on issues like anti-human trafficking and racial injustice. I became a Christian as a part of the civil rights movement. We have extended pro-life concerns to issues of poverty and pollution and climate change and gun violence and people with disabilities, and the homeless, and I'm as Dr. Williams alluded, I am and have been for 8 years now a spiritual advisor to our president, someone not very popular with people of my congregation, but yet I write devotions for him every week. We pray periodically. Becky and I were just with he and Michelle a few weeks ago, And we don't talk about politics or policy. We talk about his personal life. We talk about his family. We talk about his faith. And that's really what I want to talk to you about. How you are, I guess the general term now is how you stay centered on what's really important and what is really who you are and why God put you on the earth. You see, God knit every one of you together in your mother's womb. He gave you good works before time began, that you should walk in them. He has a plan for you. All your days were ordained when there was not yet as one of them. Each one of us is unique. Each one of us has a gift to offer. And so therefore, each one of us has an identity. And when we keep that identity and walk in that identity, that's called integrity. Now, I'm glad you're spending a whole year on this, Dr. Williams, because I'm just going to give a little snippet tonight, and I'm glad to know there's a wraparound teaching on this. But let me kind of give you both the importance of living a life of integrity, that is, doing and saying and being who you are, so that people can build with you an authentic relationship. That's what it comes down to. And then the main competitors of living a life of integrity. About 2 years ago, I was with a small delegation from the U.S. in Geneva, Switzerland. And we were talking with scientists and just a couple of, I think one political person, some academics, but mostly Ayatollahs from Iran. And we were talking about nuclear disarmament. We were talking about the negotiations, the nuclear negotiations. Now, we also took over some academics, but mostly religious leaders, because as those of you who have been in Iran, the main power brokers in Iran are not politicians, they're religious leaders. And so they conduct what they do out of their faith communities, out of their faith voices. And so here we are talking about these very important matters to both of our countries. Both of us want to build more diplomatic and more peaceful relationships between the two countries. And finally, one of the Ayatollahs just spoke and said, essentially, we call it over here, let me throw this skunk on the table. They don't have colloquialisms like that, but it means let me get the smelly truth out, the obnoxious and irritating point that everybody's trying to avoid. And this is what he said. He said, we need to build trust when there is no trust. We need to be able to have a relationship when we don't know who each other is and can't trust each other when we say who we are. That was the skunk on the table. And what he was talking about was integrity. He was talking about we need something that will lower and diffuse the animosity and the malice between our two countries. But we can't build it unless we can trust we're talking with someone who means what they say. And that's how we needed to proceed. Do you understand that doesn't just happen between countries, that happens between individuals? That happens in marriages. That happens in friendships. That happens in associations. That happens in peer relationships in each one of your fields. And so tonight, I'd like to start off with saying this. We live in a world that depends on relationships. Our world is made out of relationships. We were made by a God who is a relationship. We believe, the Christians believe, that God himself is a relationship, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, distinct yet indivisible. And he made the universe to not be separate entities. You know, when I was going to school, this is years ago, we used to think the smallest entity in the universe was an atom. Some of you are old enough to remember the atom, you know, and that you had to split the atom, and there was powerful, tremendous force in splitting the atom. Now, those of you who are familiar with quantum mechanics know that there isn't a substance. In the field of the quarks and the leptons and the fermions, there's just relationships. There's vibrations. There's insubstantial substance. It's how our world is made, by relationship. It's how our world is sustained. No individual entity can be counted upon as sustainable, no matter how strong that person is. That person needs to build a relationship in order to have any lasting effect, in order themselves to last. I'm married to a microbiologist, and she was teaching a class one time, and she came home and she said, "Would you like to know how plants replicate, how plants reproduce?" Well, she's my wife, you know. Nothing could be more boring to me than, so I said, "Oh, I really would." She said, "Well, let me just tell you." She said, "You know, there's two main ways. One, they can self-pollinate. It's called selfing, literally. And they can self-pollinate. But the other is they've got to be pollinated, cross-pollinated with a plant from somewhere else. And however that happens, whether it happens with wind or bees or birds or, however that happens, that's how they can reproduce. Now, she said, and I can feel a sermon illustration coming on, and that's why I'm telling it to you tonight, because preachers think all the time in terms of sermon illustrations. We don't learn anything. We just try to remember stuff so we can preach. And so she said, I said, "Well, tell me the difference." She said, "Well, selfing is obviously the most popular. It is the most, because it's the most convenient. And so therefore, most reproduction happens from selfing." And I said, "Well, that's great." And she said, "No, it's not." I said, "No. Tell me why not." She said, "Because when you reproduce yourself, basically you have one set of genes. And that's good as long as your environment stays the same. But if that environment changes and you only have genes that are used to that particular environment, that's an evolutionary cul-de-sac. The advantage of hybrid cross-pollination is that you have more than one set of capabilities of survival. And because you have been in that relationship and you have contributed your part, your survivability chances increase even though there's significant change in your environment. Now, I want you to think about that just for a minute. I want you to think how important relationships are to your survival. Not just because you've contributed what you have, but because you have created a successful relationship with someone who completes, who complements who you are. We're going to get to this on a personal level in just a moment. But I want to start out by saying this. Growing relationships depends on trust, and trust assumes and depends upon one's personal integrity. I don't have to be a marriage counselor to tell you that. I don't have to be someone who is looking for a significant relationship to tell you that. You want to know that someone really is who they say they are. Now, you're willing to allow for, you know, a little aberrant behavior every once in a while, because nobody can always, you know, kind of go along who they were. There's going to be aberrations. There's going to be little vacations, you know, where you know, say, where did that come from, you know? I have a story, and some of the folks that have gone to my church for a while probably heard this story before, but when I was first in ministry, I was a pastor in southern Indiana of this very unusual congregation for southern Indiana. It was a combination of this old retired railroaders congregation, these, you know, men of steel, you know, these old Nordic self-made men. And then there was an African-American congregation, which was very unusual to have an integrated congregation in southern Indiana. We had lots of folks in white coats that paid us a visit periodically. And then, not white coats, white hoods. We needed the folks in white coats, but I'm speaking to folks in white coats right now. And then there was a rural congregation. Well, this one guy, you know, just strong, had been a railroad mechanic all his life, just strong, independent guy, Nordic guy. His name was Stuart, but he was married to a woman named Olga. And she looked like Olga, you know. She had everything but the horns coming out her hat, you know. And he suffered a stroke. And you know, back in that day, you know, families took care of folks. You didn't automatically put somebody in a nursing home, but his family lived far away. The church was doing the best it could, but couldn't get him up in the night. You know, we just didn't have enough. It was a small church. And so Olga had to eventually put him into a convalescence center just until he got better. Well, he was furious. I mean, furious. So, you know, I'm the pastor, so I go visit this guy. I hit the door. You know, I've got now by this time I've got a doctorate in pastoral counseling. I know, you know, I'm gonna really comfort this guy. I hit the door. This guy just starts cussing. And he cussed. Now, cussing is not strange to me. I grew up in a family that cussed all the time. I don't like to admit that, but it's my second language. I understand it. It doesn't offend me. It's just part of, you know, it's part of my background. So he just cussed. He was cussing the nursing home. He was cussing nurses. He was cussing the doctors. He was cussing. And you know, so I walked in. I've got a degree in counseling. So I say, well, Stuart, you sound angry. He said, don't you try that blankety blank psychology stuff on me. Just started cussing again. And he cussed he cussed the church, he cussed his wife, he cussed his family, he cussed me, he cussed. Finally, he was so worn out, you know. He just had a stroke, for crying out loud, you know. And he was so worn out, he was just quiet for a minute. Well, I got off my role of counselor, because I've never been any good at that anyhow. And I got into my role of pastor. That's why I was there. And I said, well, Stuart, you want me to pray for you? And he looked at me and said, well, of course I do. I'm not an atheist. I'm just mad. See, there was some aberrant behavior there, but that wasn't who he was. He came back to himself. Remember that story about the prodigal son? He came back to himself. That's integrity. You know who you are, and you begin to live your life as God has given it to you. So how do we get off track? How do we start becoming other people or pretending we're other people for the sake of gain or immediate gratification or immediate approval or whatever it is? First of all, we need to realize that integrity, which is a matter of saying and doing what is morally consistent with whom you've purported to be. And it's not merely an individual effort. We have certain blind spots. You know, our incredible capability of becoming momentarily someone else and justifying it. We can rationalize anything. And so in order to maintain our integrity, and I've done this, I know what this is. Because I'm you know, if I'm with someone, there's a natural temptation we could call it, or a natural inclination to become more like who you're with. I mean, that's just, if I'm around somebody who's got a Southern accent, 5 minutes in, I'm talking with a Southern accent. And I'm not from the South. I'm from Ohio, for crying out loud. And so we've got that natural bent. And so how do we maintain our integrity as to who we are? Well, God, in His Word, has given us a way to do that. We need to maybe not surround ourselves, but have at least one or two other people in our lives who know who we are, who know what we do well and what we don't do well, who will remind us and be the encourager and the completer of who we are, so that we don't think we have to be all things to all people. You remember when the Lord made the first man and put him in the garden to cultivate it and to keep it, Genesis 2:15. And then basically, he had just made the world. And every time he got done making something, he stepped back and said, "Oh, it's good," you know. And bara, I think, is the Hebrew, and in other words, it's not just morally good; it's functioning just like I wanted it to. That's what that word means. It's even better than I thought it would operate. That's what that word means in Hebrew. And then the only time he did not say it's good is when he saw the man alone. He said it's not good that the man should be alone. Remember this passage? Genesis 2:18. He said, I will make him a helper suitable for him. Now, suitable for him in Hebrew, if you do this translation into the colloquial, it means I will make someone who will answer him or talk back to him. The Hebrew definition of a wife is someone who talks back to her husband. Literally. Literally it is. But I want you to see this. It's not in some sort of snippy sense. It's in a sense that says, you need me. You need me to be you. You know, remember the rest of the story. He doesn't create the woman right away. He brings all the animals so that the man can name the animals. The man's looking for a date, by the way. We know that, and you singles know what this is like. You know, looking through all the animals and there's not found one suitable for you. You know, he's calling out to these animals. None of them can answer him back. And we know that because it says there was not found one suitable for him. So he's looking for a date. Are you aardvark? Are you? No? You know? And so after he exhausts that, doing the first scientific study, by the way, because in Hebrew you name something by its attributes. And so he's doing the first scientific study. He's naming the animals according to their nature. He's not just looking for a date. He's naming. Now watch. So then he watch this, creates the woman out of the man. And then the Bible says, brings her to the man. I love this. It's the ancient pageantry of a father bringing the bride to the husband. Brings her to the man. Now, why did he have to bring her to the man? Because she was in a different place. She saw things from a different perspective. So what do we need? We need someone who is enough like us to be intimate. That's where the animals didn't qualify. But different enough to be necessary. What do you need to do in order to maintain your integrity and remember who you are and act like who you are? You need to have people in your life who are enough like you to be close, to be able to speak the truth to you, and you won't take offense, and you won't think they don't know what they're talking about. But different enough to know that you're going to a place you don't need to go, and you're becoming a person you don't need to be. And so maintaining one's integrity, and the way I've done this through my life, through all the circumstances, and it doesn't matter whether I'm praying with the president in the Oval Office or whether I'm going through the most heart-wrenching tragedy of my whole life. I'm the same person. I'm the same person because I know what I've been brought to contribute. I know who loves me for who I am. I know people who will tell me the truth. And I know I will never get away with pretending to be someone else. And so that relational component is absolutely essential because we all have blind spots. An integer, we get the word integrity, the root word is integer, is a whole number. It's not a fraction. And that doesn't mean your whole, there used to be a sense of, well, I'm whole just me. No, you were made for relationships. You are whole, but you were made for relationships. Both relationships with God, relationships with your neighbor, and a relationship with yourself. You never give up your identity. You reconfirm your identity in those relationships because that's how you contribute. So we've got to understand who we are, why we were put here. We've got to value that to the degree that it will be more attractive to us than any other role we could play, no matter what the immediate gain. Now let me come to the areas of temptation and why people are tempted to not act with integrity. These will not be new or news to you. These are just common sense and everyday occurrences. First of all, the main competition with our maintaining our own integrity, no matter what, is the offer of immediate success or gratification, or, when it gets down to it, utilitarian purposes. Utilitarian purposes. In other words, if we can find some way to gain and not be ourselves, pretend to be someone else, just for a little bit, then we will be sacrificing our integrity. We will not be presenting ourselves for who we are or what God made us to be. Jesus had, in Matthew chapter 16, 26, he said this, "What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul?" Now, your soul is your eternal identity. It's who you are eternally. And so therefore, if you're forfeiting your soul, if you are giving up who you are, can that even measure, whatever gain you would get in this world? He goes on to say, or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? I want to read you just a few quotes from business people. If we're talking utility, many of you are in business, some of you are in academia. These aren't just religious words. These are good anywhere in the world. But I want to read you just a couple of quotes or a few quotes from people who you've heard of and how important integrity is. First of all, here's one from Horace Greeley. He says, "Fame is vapor, popularity an accident, riches take wings. Only one thing endures, and that is character. Only one thing endures, and that is character." Last week, I wrote the president a devotion about I came that you didn't choose me, I chose you, and I chose you that you might bear fruit and your fruit might endure. I know at the end of his term, he's thinking, what's going to last here? Everybody puts it in terms of legacy. It's not really legacy. It's what good have you done that will keep doing good when you're gone. It doesn't matter what your reputation is. It doesn't matter what people thought about you. It's what good keeps doing good, no matter whether it's attributed to you or not. That's what fruitfulness is. But here's the thought that I put in there. The fruit that continues, the fruit that lasts, doesn't come usually in a moment. It comes in an entire season. Have you ever thought about how long in any given year it takes a plant to bear fruit? The whole season. And then winter comes. How long does it take you to give to the world that which will last? Your whole life. It's not about what you've produced. It's not about what you've sold. It's not about the whether your markers are up or down financially. Your life is the fruit that lasts. And so character, integrity, is not about how you're doing at the moment. Character is the life that you have lived that will continue to have results even when they're not attributed to you anymore. Second quote I want to read you is from Russell Palmer, who's the CEO of the Palmer Group. He says, we need to stress that personal integrity is as important as executive skill in business dealings. By the way, business dealings doesn't confine themselves to business people. We all do business dealings. When you love someone, watch this, for your advantage, instead of considering the cost of what that love is going to be to you, when you love someone for self-gratification, that's not love, that's business. Business is in the business of profit. And many personal relationships aren't love, they're business. And so when he says, as important as executive skills in business dealings, setting an example from the top has a ripple effect throughout the business school or corporation. After nearly 3 decades in business, 10 years as a chief executive of a big accounting firm, I have learned that the standards are set at the top filter throughout a company. Personal integrity is as important as executive skill. It doesn't matter how good you are at what you do. Personal integrity is as important as executive skill. And let me show you this one last quote, and then I'll finish out my talk, and we can talk. I enjoy answering questions and talking rather than just talking at you. But this last one is from Warren Buffett. Who else? In looking for people to hire, you look for 3 qualities: integrity, intelligence, and energy. And if they don't have the first, the other 2 will kill you. So, the one temptation that we have is living life by utilitarian values instead of by authentic, personal relationship. The second temptation, I've already mentioned this, is our yearning for approval. Many of us are addicted to approval. We want someone to say to us how good we've done, how important we are, how much we're worth. Here's the problem with that. You will become, if that is your addiction, you will become anything you think that other person wants you to be. And you will be scared the entire time. You will be anxious the entire time. We are not born with self-authenticating powers. You can look at yourself all day in the mirror and say, I like you. You're a winner. You're worth a great deal, and so and so. But if it's you having to say it, You won't believe it. We naturally seek affirmation. You know why? Because we were born for God's affirmation. The thing about the gospel is we've already got it. That's the gospel. We've already got it. So most people live their lives appraising their life either with the voices that are present around them, trying to seek their approval, or trying to make up for a voice in their past that was so dominant that that voice is still the one that they try to gain approval from. Or they have the choice of listening to God's voice. I heard a story once. I love this story. It's a fantasy story, so it's not a real story. But it was about this street artist. Have you ever walked down like the streets of New York and there's people with paintings out there? Sometimes they're velvet Elvises but this guy's gig was clowns. He was a clown artist. And so this couple was strolling through and they were looking at the different clowns and so on and so forth. And they were looking at the prices, $10 and $20 and $25. And now, I want you just to stop with me for a moment. And I want you to imagine with me that somewhere, out of nowhere, Rembrandt steps into that scene. And everybody knows it's Rembrandt. They know who it is. And Rembrandt begins to look at those paintings. And Rembrandt says, "This is marvelous. These are master. Look at what he did with light. Look at what he did with shading. Look at what he did with the complementary colors. Look at what he did with the actionable environment. Look at what..." Let me ask you a question. What just happened to the price of those paintings? They went through the roof, didn't they? Because the word of the master set their value. For us to have lives of integrity, we need to believe the master about ourselves. We need to understand what he said about us, what we were made in his image. We need to understand how important we were to him when he sent his son. We need to understand that. And that gives us the courage. And then the last thing is, and this is probably my most feared cultural dynamic these days. There are people who are choosing to live in an oxymoron. It's called virtual reality. There are more and more of our young people who are living on the screen. They're living in relationships with figures or with people they'll never really get to know, and they're becoming people they'll never really be. This is a great temptation. It's a great temptation because it's impossible to live a life of integrity in a world that's not real, in a world that has been imagined. And so part of what we need to do is we need to speak to a culture that says you have to have an actual relationship with someone before you can ever be fulfilled or satisfied or do what you were sent here to do. We need to help our children and others who don't understand that there are artificial worlds that people just make up in their heads. They think they're real, but they're not real. And these people can be politicians. These people can be philosophers. These people can be church people. They can let me tell you one last story. Can I tell one last story? How much time have I got here? I'll tell just one last story. It's worth it. You'll like this one. When I was working on my doctorate, I was doing a year of clinical pastoral education in what was back then the Central State Hospital for the Mentally Insane in Indianapolis, Indiana. Now, back then you could use the word insane. Can't use that word anymore. But they had residential hospitals for people who were psychotic, and we were on teams. There was a physician, a social worker, and an occupational therapist. All of these folks. As we tried to bring folks back into functionality and the capability of having relationships and so on and so forth. And so I worked there for a year. Well, the first day I went there, this was the spookiest place you've ever seen in your life. For any of you who have ever watched an Alfred Hitchcock movie, this could have been the setting of the scariest Alfred Hitchcock movie anywhere. And I walked on this campus, and I'm a 25-year-old doctoral student, and I'm pretty intimidated anyhow. I'm remembering every psycho movie I've ever seen. And I don't know where the administration building is so that they can kind of get me to where I need to go. So I walk on campus. And this one building looks a little bit more modern than the others, so I start heading toward it. Here's this whole line of patients, and they were literally in a line. They were in gowns, they were in slippers, they had been medicated, you could see. They had attendants in white coats, but the attendants really weren't paying any attention to them. And they were just kind of shuffling along, behind the attendants, and so I passed them, and they were glazed over and very heavily medicated. So I went to the building, won the building. She said, you got to go back across the campus, that's the building. So I came back the way I came. Unbeknownst to me, one of those patients had peeled off. The attendant didn't see her. They were talking with each other. And she was hiding behind a bush. And I started walking past, literally true, walking past the bush. She springs out at me. Her eyes are just furious. She looks at me and she says, I know who you are, and I know what you've been saying about me, and I will kill you. And then she just walked off. Well, I went home to change my pants. See, back then we didn't have post-traumatic, we just had go change your pants and figure it out. And so I'm you're just kind of debriefing. What just happened there? And this is what I figured out. Here's a woman who thought she knew what was happening on the outside. She was convinced she knew me. She was convinced she knew what I was saying, even though we had never met before. She was convinced because she was trapped inside her own head. That's my definition of insanity. Institutions get trapped within themselves and think they know what's going on. Church is really bad about this. Let me tell you what the world is. Church hadn't been in the world in the last 50 years. I'll tell you what's going on in the world. Yet they think they do, but they're talking to themselves. Any affinity group is in danger of creating a virtual reality and living in not real relationships with the very people they need to have relationships with. And so what is integrity? Integrity is having the courage to build a real relationship with someone else, being who you really are, and acting according to what you really believe, so that if there is ever a chance of having an authentic relationship, you've done your part. And then you listen, because you're confident enough to know who you are that you can actually listen to who they are. That's integrity. It's not just saying anything you want and being anything you want. It's being a part of one or more relationships so that you can add to what you were sent here to add. And you can be who you were sent here to be. Amen. So can we do some questions and answers?
So thank you very much. Appreciated that. We do have mics on either side. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, yes. We have one going up to the mic here.
Do you plan to become a political leader?
Never, ever, ever. And let me tell you, the great thing about knowing who you are is knowing who you're not. I'm a pastor. That's my calling. I'll always be a pastor, and I love being a pastor.
A question relative to that. You mentioned on several occasions you've met with everybody from the president to the ayatollahs and others in your work in the larger community. So how do you, it's one thing to maintain your own respect and your own integrity. Knowing who you are, how does that then give you a launching pad or a place to stand to have respect for someone that you may be diametrically opposed to or feel that they're absolutely wrong, maybe even not just misguided?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, the great thing about just being who you are and not having to be everything to everyone is that you resign the general management of the universe. And so I don't have to have somebody agree with me before I can love them and I can treat them with respect. When I did say the prayer at the Democratic National Convention, probably 10% of my congregation got up and walked out because I had been a rather poor pastor and not taught them that political differences, even though I'd been a card-carrying Republican for most of my life, we aren't about politics. We're about extending the love of Jesus. And the president and others know exactly where I stand. I was the first one he called up when he made the decision on gay marriage. I'll never forget, I'm driving down the road with my wife, get this call, president's on the line. Would you speak with him? I said, give me time to get in the parking lot. And so pulled off, and he said, I want to tell you about an interview I just had. And he said, I know that our relationship is very difficult for you in your circles. And I know you're going to take heat for this, but I want you to know what I did. And I said, well, Mr. President, you know, that's not our definition of marriage in Scripture. He said, I know, but you got to realize I'm not a pastor, I'm a president. I'm talking about civil marriage, not religious marriage. I'm talking about the laws. And I said, I absolutely understand where you're coming from. And so the point is we're good friends. We love each other. We don't agree on many things. But when you're a pastor, it's never about political agreement. It's never about strategic agreement. It's about how do we understand what God is telling us to do? And how can I encourage you in your walk as you listen to God? And how can I keep from trying to control you? So anyhow, it's fairly easy. And when you make those lines drawn and you say, I don't do politics, there are person after person who comes into my office who wants me to take a message or materials or somehow talk the president into this or talk, other folks into that. And I just don't do that. I'm a pastor. And so the whole integrity thing of just, I can just do my part and leave the rest to God really helps out.
So you don't have to be the choir director of the world.
I don't want to be. I don't even know how to read music, and I know that. And so I can hardly do my part, let alone everybody else's part.
Dr. Guarneri.
Thank you very much for what you had to say tonight. I believe that our society is spinning pretty fast, and I think many of the people within the healthcare professions spin even faster.
Yeah.
So how do you begin to slow them down so they can reflect on their integrity?
That's a really a really good question, and I think it all comes back, and of course maybe this is just because I'm a pastor, but it all comes back to understanding what is supremely and eternally important. Most people that are spinning really fast are trying to get the business of the day done and as much of it as they can. But you've got to come back to what really matters forever. You know, one of the smartest men I know, and a good friend of mine, is Francis Collins, who is the head of the Human Genome Project, and now he's the head of NIH. Here's a man who is just brilliant. But when he was doing his clinical practice, he was raised in an atheist family, and he had a patient that was a believer who was dying. And she was as bubbly as she could be, just happy from one day to the next. And he thought, well, she's in denial. You know, obviously she's not dealing with the situation. And now he could tell this better, and he does tell it better, you know. When you ask him how he became, and he's an evangelical Christian now, and he said, so I went into her one day and I said, do you know your situation? She said, oh yeah, I'm dying. And he said, how can you be so cheerful? And she looked at him, she simply said, because I know where I'm going. And then she said, do you? It haunted him. And he was not able to get away from that question until he went to scriptures and found the truth of Jesus Christ. And now, to see Francis Collins and N.T. Wright, who is a great biblical theologian from England, playing their guitars together and singing about Jesus, you know, is a hoot. I don't know of many people who have more responsibility or more intelligence than Francis Collins, but the way he keeps going with his attitude is he focuses on what's eternal. So that's what we got to do.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank
Appreciate your presentation this evening. Thank you for coming as well. This is our final colloquium of the year. We'll start up again in the fall, and so please let us know how we can get a hold of you and let you know what our next presenters and themes will be. Dr. Hunter will be in the back hall on the left here to sign any books if you'd like, and thank you for coming.